Saturday again. We were so excited. Love Saturdays.
This is
all the things.
Welcome
to all the things. I am Monique Dusan.
The script is right here.
Mike, Monique.
Well, okay. See,
we always have to get adjusted here.
Yeah, just while we show everyone.
All right. This is the show where we discuss all the things related to God, the Bible, and real life.
Yes, from a historic Christian point of view. I'm still Monique Dusan.
Yes, and I am Krista Bontrager, also known as Theology Mom. Everyone raise your hand if you remember the old days before Monique had a website, before she had a Twitter account, before anybody knew who she was. Yes, testify. Now,
all the old days.
Now her following's like 3 times as big as mine. It's fabulous. Here we are. We want to let you know that Bob is joining us behind the scenes. Oh, you don't have your camera.
Somebody keeps taking.
Monique stole his camera. So
wow, it's like don't be nice to Monique night. My goodness, maybe I don't know. I feel like I should just kind of slide under the table, just kind of go away. My goodness, Yes, I have the camera. I'm sorry,
but Bob is here. He's switching the buttons. Join us on the live chat over on YouTube at the Theology Mom. We have our guest moderators tonight. Our friend Caleb is joining us from Engaged Truth, and the fabulous Emily Bontrager.
Yes. No, Shane, we didn't give Caleb no cheer. Come on, Caleb. Yay. So glad Caleb.
Seeing all our friends checking in. Jeremy's there.
Yes.
Hey, Vanessa. Hey, Brian. Oh, our friends Zach. And is it Yente?
Yente. Yes.
All right. Joining us from Portland, the home of peaceful protests for almost 60 days now.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
And on the Center for Biblical Unity site, Kelly and Wendy have checked in.
Awesome.
Hello.
Be sure to hit that thumbs up, hit the like button, hit the share button, comment. All of those things help our algorithms because we are pretty sure, and you're going to see at the end of the show, that Facebook is censoring us.
Oh, yes. Y'all, they coming strong for your sister.
Yes.
Like, my goodness.
So we need you to help our analytics and interact with us. So all of those things help people find us on the show. So this show is brought to you by the Center for Biblical Unity, the Theology Mom podcast.
Center for Biblical Unity.
And...
Center.
Family 210 Clothing. In fact, we got swag. We got a lot of swag. Support the Center for Biblical Unity. You can just go on centerforbiblicalunity.com/merch. And we have a lot more merch than just the t-shirts.
You can get t-shirts, hoodies, tank tops. You need a face mask. I don't know. Whatever you need, we got it. Coffee mug.
Yeah.
Shoelaces. I don't know.
We even have some pictures. Let's show some pictures of people with their swag. There we go.
Looking good.
Showing their pride in CFBU. There's Chris and his wife. That's awesome. I think they're some of our partners. Now, see, I love this gal. She's got her shirt and the Just Thinking podcast hat.
Yes.
Repping for Virgil. There we go. Virgil and Daryl. There's our friend Allison, our production assistant, who's helping us every week write the show notes.
Yes.
Out for a bike ride.
That's Sharia. I had a funny conversation. She posted this picture on Twitter, and I DM'd her and was like, "Hey, can I share this?" And she was like, "Sure." She's like, "I'm gonna tell my mom." And I was like, "Well, I'll just call her. Like I can tell her. You just send me your number. I won't do anything weird. I'll just give her a call." And she was like, "She's gonna die." And I was like, well,
"We don't want anyone to die."
That. But it was so fun. It was a really cool conversation.
We surprised her mom.
Yeah, her mom is Angie, and so we had a really good little chat, and thankful for Sharia.
So $5 of every purchase goes to help support the launch of the Center for Biblical Unity and develop new resources. So yes, big things are happening. Be sure to watch all the way to the end of the show so you can see what's happening with us. Okay.
Yes, and it could be to your benefit, like truly to your benefit, to stay to the end.
Yes.
All right, so tonight we're talking about scientific racism.
Yeah, which might be kind of a new term for some people.
Yeah. It's a new term for me, and I've been talking about race and racism for a long time. I was like, is my DNA racist against me? Like, what's going on?
What's happening here? So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about eugenics. We're going to talk about Darwinism.
Yeah.
Margaret Sanger, Planned Parenthood.
They was trying to take my people out.
Yes.
Hey, if we want to talk about real racism, let's talk about eugenics. Let's talk about Margaret Sanger.
Yeah.
Please.
Who was in the news this week. So we're going to talk about it.
I was going to say.
So let's get our friend Dr. Joseph Miller on the Zoom machine. See if we can fire that up. There we are.
Hello.
Hey, Joe.
Hello.
Thank you for being here.
Hey, I'm glad to be here. You guys love the spirit of your show, love what you guys are about, and enjoyed it for the time I've been listening. So
that's great. Thank you so much. And we want to just let everybody know that you're a minister with Ratio Christi, which is a campus kind of apologetics group. We've had our friend Jane Pantig on before from Ratio Christi.
Jane and Joe actually co-host a podcast together, but I don't want to get too far ahead.
Yeah, but called Off the Cuff, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, and Jane's in the comments. Great. On the chat.
She's going to say mean things about me, so don't listen to anything she says. She told me on our show, we just finished our show, she's like, I'm going to come over and roast you.
All right. So Joe's with, his website is morethancake.org, and you can check out his podcasts. And we're going to talk a little bit about your area of expertise tonight, Joe. Why don't you start by giving us a little bit about you, let our listeners get to know you, tell us about your background and how you came to be interested in questions related to race and eugenics and Darwinism and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's been a long, circuitous journey, all the roundabouts we take in life. But I started off my life, career, I guess, academic career. I was going to Penn State back in the day for engineering and got involved in ministry there with a campus group and ended up feeling called to ministry. So I finished a long 5-year degree and then ended up going into seminary, did an MDiv. I was out in Oklahoma. I worked at a Chinese church actually down there as a youth guy. Ended up in ministry in the state of Washington. I used to do consulting for churches, building facilities. It paid a lot of bills over the years and decided I want to do my DMin. And so I sold my company and started to take my DMin and focus on really leadership development for church planting. Planted a few churches over the years and then came to San Diego after a long bit and started teaching down here. I was actually teaching in college seminary for about 8-9 years. Worked as an online guy for a dean for online. And in the midst of that, realized, hey, I want to keep teaching. I want to keep involved and did another master's in science and religion. And my thesis was really on Hebrew cosmology, which got me interested in Adam and Eve stuff. And then that sort of led down this road where ended up doing a PhD now. And my focus really ended up being on how the historic Adam and Eve being the best case, I think provides us the best argument, both against racism and for racial reconciliation. And so this whole long route of theology through philosophy and science and all kind of came together at this point. And when I started that a few years ago, who knew it would be so relevant for our discussions today?
Right.
So
right.
That's
well, maybe a good place to start. I see your sign there behind you, Imago Dei. Why don't you tell us about that and the connection to Adam and Eve, because that'll set a good kind of theological foundation for what we're going to talk about tonight.
Yeah. So as I started working on, he starts to write all this crazy stuff and it's real, academic, and there's a lot of philosophy and science and stuff that goes in for these academic things. You say, well, how does this relate? I'm 20 some years in pastoral ministry. The real question is, the study is for me. The question is, how do I relate it to other people? And so as I started to do all these talks and different things that like we're talking about today, I actually first connected it to the shirt, the B'Tselem Elohim, which is out of Genesis 1:27, which means in the image of God. And this was another design that I have. So I made this shirt. I made this design. Imago Dei is the Latin version of that. And this one is focused on the idea that male and female are both necessary for reflecting the fullness of God's image. It's not, even though I as an individual do, but we need male and female. And so I started to come up with these designs and some shirts and some other stuff to just say, how do I start a conversation that's focused not on the divisive stuff like the culture is, whether it's the Black Lives Matter or All Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter, all these things. These are all in some part political statements. But this is a deep theological statement of the truth of who we are in God. And that to me is the beginning point of these conversations about race and racism and racial reconciliation being the ultimate goal, because this idea, how we're created in God's image and made with intrinsic sacredness that can't be taken away.
Amen. That's good. I think when I've talked about the the divisions and things like that, and how do we move forward, I think understanding our identity, understanding that we are all first created, in his image, gives us such a good starting place to talk about things like unity or oneness and going along a road that we can develop together when we don't start from these arbitrary places or places as defined by culture. So I love that. I kind of want to switch gears and start to dig in a little bit. So can you define exactly what eugenics is? 'Cause I know what it is now. I was a little skeptical at first, but I do know what it is. And how has it been practiced in America? Like, would I regularly know it if I saw it? Is it still being practiced?
Yeah, it's one of those hidden parts of American history. It's funny, we're in this woke culture. Everybody wants to know, like, bring out the skeletons. But this is one of those skeletons that nobody really wants to talk about on the woke side, because it works against the narrative a lot that's being presented out there in our college campuses and in those contexts. So just the real quick skinny on that is, there's a guy named Francis Galton in the UK. He was actually Charles Darwin's cousin. And he coined this term eugenics, which was really, he described as like, it's a scientific program for race hygiene. So throughout
race hygiene. Wow.
Yeah, race hygiene.
That's quite a term. Okay.
Yeah. I actually love that term that was used because it's so vivid in describing what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
Now we have to define race, and I want to get to that in just a minute, because it's not quite what we use it for the same way. But this idea of race hygiene started to grow, and Galton argued that evolution basically was this sort of blind eugenics. So the idea of natural selection, this process of survival for the fittest, that's nature's sort of blind eugenics. And what Galton wanted to do is say, let's have a scientific approach to cooperate with nature and evolution's process of purifying the human race. And that's what his sort of goal was. And it involved things like advocacy for things like changing public policy to limit immigration. So when we get today, so when Trump talks about immigration reform and putting up a border wall, I don't think he has anything of this necessarily in mind. Maybe he does. I don't know. I don't really know I don't gather that he's a strong historian. So I don't mean this in a political sense, but the reaction we get to wanting to limit immigration from other countries, I think is built into our cultural psychology of like, we know there's something wrong about that in a sense. We don't know why, we just think it's wrong. Well, it's because we go back to eugenics, and part of their goal was keep the impure humans, the lower evolved humans out so they don't reproduce with the higher evolved white Northern Europeans. So we got to limit immigration. We got to reduce charitable giving, which is another thing. Reduced old age pensions, change insurance practices. And then, of course, policies related to sexual reproduction. And those are all sort of things that were advocated by eugenists as a way to help evolution along to purify the human race.
So when you talk about, let's just break down the immigration issue to give a practical example. So people who were of Northern European descent were looked upon as being more kind of genetically pure than even those of Southern European descent. Would that be correct?
But
Yeah,
based
and
on
that's-
what qualifiers?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's where you get. That's where and people write today. This is a debunked science in the sense of it was foolish, but it was the scientific consensus of the day, and it was all based on phenotypic features. In other words, external features like nose, the shape of eyes,
Eye color.
the slope of forehead, Africanized features, the broad nose, those sort of things were all considered lower examples of lower evolved human phenotypes of the way we are. So this was all in how things were depicted in the scientific journals and the articles and in the educational institutions. And so based on other features, people that were southern parts of Europe, I guess, the best I can guess is I think probably because it's closer to Africa, they must be lower evolved. So whatever features they had physically must be, the lower evolved forms. It was terrible science, but it was Darwin's science and it was the scientific consensus of the day. Matter of fact, I'll give you a real quick. This is a funny one. I talk about this one. You know the phrase, on Charlie Brown, when Lucy always calls Charlie, he says, "Charlie Brown, you blockhead." Blockhead was a racist term back in the day for Germanic Europeans because they had a more square-shaped head. So because they had this, they called them blockheads, which was a racial epithet. So that's the way it built into the culture. Is fascinating.
So we have a comment already. Someone is asking on YouTube, is it better to say superior more than pure? Yeah.
Bob.
Bob is
Cornelia.
asking that.
Yeah.
And they wanted to maintain the purity of the genetically superior people.
Yeah. So, and this is again where this term, what did they mean by race, really comes into a thing. And I know we wanted to mention Sanger later, and I saw that in the intro. There's a lot of things that we need to, can look at. But understand this. So when most eugenists were talking about racial purity or racial hygiene, they didn't mean only against white versus black. And that's kind of what we were just talking about. So there was, there were whites that were lower on the evolutionary scale. Asians were, above black people, but lower than whites. And then you got, Aborigines from Australia, or, and you've got all these racial groups that go on a spectrum. So all from lower to higher. So whether they would say superior, they might not actually say superior in some ways, is because Darwin argued that, we're selected for fitness based on our current environmental conditions. So it wasn't necessarily superior or inferior. And this is why it gets confusing sometimes when we talk about white supremacy as a separate issue, because they didn't necessarily feel that whites were superior. They just thought they were better genetically fit. So therefore, we wanted to help those stronger, fitter people survive, if that makes sense.
I'm just so curious as to who decided who was the most fit. Like what?
Yeah.
Like who was in control that said, "All right, these are the more fit people than these people."
Yeah.
That's not clear to me.
Too.
Yeah.
Was there like a council?
Yeah. Well, no. And this is actually why Darwin's theory was so successful. See, Darwin traded in these sort of existing racial prejudices and white supremacist ideas that were common already. And so just to be clear, Darwin didn't invent racism. When we talk about scientific racism, it wasn't invented by this process, but the existing prejudices of, say, white Europeans against not, some other white, Europeans, but mostly non-white Europeans, those existed. But Darwin used that existing prejudice to persuade people that his scientific theory was valid. So you'd say, hey, look, we all know that when we look around the world, we see these, these tribes in Africa and how they're uncivilized. They're like beasts, they don't have, they don't wear clothes and they don't have language advanced like we do. And they don't have the ships like we've done. So clearly we all know they're inferior, but this is why, because evolution didn't advance them like they did us. So he used those existing prejudices to convince people, oh, well, that makes sense. It must be good science.
Yeah, I'm still stumped by that.
Yeah. Well,
Here's my question. Did everyone, like, if you held to eugenics and to Darwin's belief, did everyone believe it, like, across the board? Were there, like, a spectrum? Like, maybe the Black Africans, I don't think that they're, like, uncivilized. I just think that it's hot. But, I'm still for the superiority of my race. Maybe, was there a spectrum, or did everybody kind of just want to get rid of my people?
Yeah, there definitely is. And that's one of these little tricky issues where, you can have people look back, and if it's their favorite person, they can sort of ignore or say, well, they didn't really mean what we think they meant by racism today, that kind of stuff. So there were certainly a spectrum. Like, for example, there's what's called positive eugenics and negative eugenics. So positive with eugenics was sort of like, hey, let people make their own choices. We want to certainly promote purity of the races, but we don't want to have government we don't want what's called negative eugenics is just like forced sterilization. We don't want the government going and putting people in concentration camps like Hitler did, who was inspired by eugenics in America, by the way, which was a big part of his inspiration. So there's a big spectrum there as far as what was positive in eugenics and negative eugenics. So positive was like, hey, let people choose. But we know there's these differences, but I don't really want to, Darwin himself was opposed to slavery. He was not a fan of the slavery issue. Now, he just thought eventually, because whites were superior, they'd eventually wipe out all the Black people, but he didn't want us to cooperate necessarily and make that happen. But he knew that his theory would allow this to, he was afraid actually his theories would be used for this sort of negative eugenics purpose. And but he had no moral way to sort of put that cap on it, right? He didn't have a way to say, well, this is where we need to stop, because the theory in itself had nothing built in that said, well, why not, make the government force.
So not all people who hold to Darwinism, I want to be really careful here, automatically fall into believing in eugenics. I mean, those beliefs can be related, but they don't have to be related. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, the way I say it is Darwinism doesn't entail racism. In other words, I'm a Darwinist, you have to be a racist. It doesn't. But Darwinism does entail the idea that there are people who are inferior and there are people who are superior. There are some people who are more fit. There are some people who are less fit. So it's just a matter of who you want to pick. So today, nobody was, well, that's why they say, eugenics, oh, we don't believe that anymore. But yet we have the same people like Sanger, I'm trying to think, who's the guy at Yale? Yeah, Peter Sanger. Who will argue, hey, up to 2 years old, we should be able to, a parent should be able to decide to kill their child up to 2 because they're not fully formed. They haven't attained full human personhood. Hey, when our old people get old and they're sick and they cost too much, we should be able to do away with them and euthanize them. Those are all forms of eugenics. So, and all of those are entailed by Darwinism because there's a denial of B'Tselem Elohim. There's a denial of human sacredness. There's a denial that we're created, all people, in the image of God. And so you're left with picking and choosing which sort of qualities you value and which you don't. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm just wondering, like, what if the quality I value, like my own life, gets outvoted? You know, and
then you are out of luck.
Yeah.
That brings me back to something that you said earlier about sterilization. Who were the groups of people that were sterilized? Was it just like the mentally ill?
Well, not even like, just the mentally ill. That sort of frightens me right there.
I know. I mean, like, what was the thought behind even how you select someone who would be sterilized? And did this happen in the States, like up until when? Mm-hmm. I have so many questions. Sorry, I'm just asking them all at one time.
Oh, that's all right. Yeah, this is fascinating. I mean, it really is. I'm glad you're enthusiastic about this, because this is something Christians need to understand and learn, because Christians were just as susceptible to this as anybody else. Mm-hmm. There were Christians who advocated, and I want to get to your question, but I want to make sure people understand this. because we said, hey, just because you're a Darwinist doesn't make you a racist. Well, just because you're a Christian doesn't mean you were opposed to eugenics. There were competitions in the United States of who could preach the best eugenics sermon, and they would win prizes if they could have the best sermon on how to promote eugenics. There were people who radically shifted all of their theology to account for Darwin's theory and how we could reshape our theology to fit this sort of thing. And one of those keys for all these people was that traditional Christian moral values were the barrier, because Christians would have these groups that would help the poor, that would help the hungry, that would help the needy, and that was only propping up nature's trash bin of people. So the idea
was that what they would call them, was nature's trash bin?
In so many words, many people did. Yeah. I mean, weeds. That's my paraphrase it, but they were the low of the low, and it didn't matter if you were white or black or Asian. If poverty was connected to, we said, hey, if you're poor, it's because there's some sort of biological trait that makes you poor. If you're mentally ill, we don't want you reproducing because you'll pass on that mental illness to somebody else. If you are a thief or if you get caught stealing, there's a genetic predisposition to that, because Darwin's idea is there's a sort of determinism through genetics of who we are. So we don't want you passing on those stealing genes to your offspring. So it started, certainly, I mean, the Supreme Court in Bell versus Buck decided, yes, we are going it is lawful for example, these institutions that held people who are mentally ill to sterilize them by force without their consent, because that was helping to make sure that the purity lines of humanity stayed pure. And again, they didn't care if you were black or brown or white. If you were mentally ill, they didn't want it, corrupting the race, the human race.
So what time frame are we talking about here in America's history? Yeah. Like, give me a little bit of a snapshot here about what our years are roughly.
So 1890s, you have a lot of the first moves to limit immigration, and a lot of the eugenist advocates, the Darwinist, scientists advocating for, hey, we gotta control our borders so that we're not allowing these people from lower societies to come in and interbreed with white people who are obviously clearly more civilized. And so it started then, but really in the early 1900s, it really took off. It was really the biggest scientific export of the United States was this idea of eugenics, and it wasn't just limited to the West. Just as an aside, and I'll get to that other time frame. As it started to grow, you had these Darwinian evolutionary ideas picked up in Korea, in China, in Japan, and there's great articles by folks who are living in those, tracing back this history that the Japanese believed that they were genetically superior to the Chinese and the Koreans, and so a lot of the war, the reason they were allied with Hitler was because of this idea. They bought into genetic superiority of the Japanese people. So it wasn't just that we exported that. And so what happened is through the early 20th century, we started to grow in this. It started to expand into more laws. A lot of those laws, by the middle of the 20th century, you had more than 30 plus states had laws against intermarriage. Black and white couldn't marry.
Interracial marriage.
Interracial marriage. And so that was pretty dominant. What kind of happened is when people found out what Hitler was doing, and don't get it wrong, eugenists in their writings, they were envious of what Hitler was able to accomplish, They wrote about, oh man, his programs for racial hygiene are just amazing. I wish we could do it here, but we have these sticky laws that keep us from doing this kind of thing. And, we really meant this. But then when it really came out, how many people in the concentration camps, the eugenists said, okay, we got to rethink our strategy. So you're looking in the 30s, 40s, into the 50s, eugenists, they didn't change. But what they said is we have to kind of come up with a softer, gentler way to maybe focus more on the positive eugenics side as opposed to that negative eugenics. How do we get people to agree to, to abort their own children? How do we get people to buy into this so they'll willingly do it and not pass on their bad genes to the next generation?
Okay, so then the question that comes right after that.
This is so demonic. I'm really having a hard time here.
What did they do? Like, what was the plan then to get people to just willingly abort their children? Because it sounds like it would be like they had to sit down together, maybe a little council, and come up with a plan.
Yeah. So because this was so integrated with the science, this is why they were able to sort of make things work. So there's a guy named Charles Davenport. He's a professor at University of Chicago, Harvard educated guy. He founded the Station for Experimental Evolution in Cold Springs Harbor, which you guys know is the Cold Springs Harbor in Long Island. That's where Watson and Crick made their discovery,
right.
Their discovery, right? Well, Watson, they're both pretty much racist. Matter of fact, Watson recently got in trouble for some statements, talking about the inferiority of women and other stuff.
We should probably tell people Watson and Crick were the ones who were instrumental in discovering the DNA double helix. Yeah. And that was a big breakthrough discovery in the realm of genetics. So,
yes. And they were in line with the scientific consensus of the day that was advancing these ideas. So because it was so built in, it was easy, I think, to put these eugenic ideas into the mainstream through more positive sounding things. Like I've read some of the literature where these folks were talking about how, hey, we need to convince people, the idea of choice. Oh, it's a woman's choice. That started to come out after, of course, what Hitler did was bad and people realized this is not good. We can't force people into this. So we have to say eugenists got together and said, hey, we need to find a way to show women this is about their choice. It's for their benefit. They're helping themselves. They don't want to, have this baby born into poverty because they're just passing on the cycle of poverty.
So it's sort of a self-selection into it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. They built a self-selection into it.
All right.
And that was the trick. And that's why, and I know like Sanger, that kind of came up and maybe we'll come up with that later, but that's why the proponents of Planned Parenthood and the defenders of Sanger have for so long been able to get away because yes, she aligned herself with eugenists when it was convenient. Yes, she spoke with KKK people, but really she was about helping women and she had these positive ways of phrasing it. This is all to help women. But her heart was eugenic heart.
Yeah.
She realized that this is about purifying, racial hygiene.
Well, that's what I would say, because if it was, you don't want to have this baby in poverty, then you look at the demographics of who were the people who were in poverty the most. If those were people of color, then it would just align itself to kind of racially cleanse a whole people group, so to speak. Yeah. If we're talking about your choice and being responsible with your child's life or being responsible with the other children that you have, so you definitely don't want to have more children.
Yeah.
I would just like to read our friend Allison's comment because it kind of sums it up for me right now. She says, "What in the world? This is shocking."
Yeah.
But I do want to read a couple of these comments here that are coming in because there's some good questions that are following up with what we're saying. Let's see, boy. Jeremy has a really good observation. He's YouTube, Jeremy Webb. He says, "Wow, seeing the world through the lens of Scripture versus seeing Scripture through the lens of worldly wisdom." Mm-hmm. And we're seeing so much of that right now with the CRT conversation. What an interesting parallel this was, because many And I'm curious, like, was it mostly progressive Christians who were kind of going along with the eugenics? Were conservative Christians going along with this too? Where were the Catholics and the Orthodox? Like, maybe you can paint that picture for us a little bit more.
Yeah. So this one of the strongest voices against eugenics was really the Roman Catholic Church in the early 20th century, although they had their supporters. One of the studies that I've done on a guy named Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, he was a French Catholic priest, and also a scientist. He really talked strongly about that, but by and large, the Roman Catholics were against it. In large part because they opposed, any kind of pills or things like that to prevent women from getting pregnant, right? So because of that, because they believed that life started in conception, they couldn't buy into a lot of these other things that the eugenists were advocating for. And so, like the commenter you had there on YouTube is right. When you see it through a Christian worldview that recognizes this imago Dei, this B'Tselem Elohim, that we are all made in the image of God, that life begins at this moment of conception, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, especially if they were Thomists, which most Roman Catholics were, Thomas Aquinas, philosophy, don't worry about it. But this idea that it didn't matter if you were a human born with a missing leg, you were still a full human because you had this spiritual, your spirit, what made you was still there. Even if you were mentally not all there, whatever the term is for the, back then they call it, mentally retarded. Today it's just challenged or, different words. But they said it didn't matter if you didn't have all your mental faculties because you're still fully human. You have full human personhood. But to those outside of that Christian commitment to Christian faith, no, it was bad. It was bad. They bought into this.
So our friend Amy Davis is asking, she wants to know, she's heard through the media that sterilization was practiced on the Native Americans.
I haven't done a lot of studies on what was done to Native Americans. I have read that there were some forced sterilization stuff. I have no expertise in that particular side of it. Mostly it's on the mentally ill that I've read about, and that's where I kind of have my expertise. So I don't want to speak too directly on that, but I'm sure it was done if it was done.
All right. So, all right, I want to just ask you a quick question here. Is how widespread was this? Like, was eugenics just sort of this weird fringe group of scientists? Because there's always the fringe scientists. I've worked in science apologetics for over 2 decades, and I know that there's always fringe groups. Well, was this one of those fringe beliefs, or was this more of a mainstream idea?
Like they were having eugenics parties and
Stop.
Yeah,
They were.
Stop it.
No, they were. Okay, so let me back up and give you this little bit of perspective.
Devil is a lie.
A lot of people say, well, that was social Darwinism, it wasn't Darwin, whatever. So we already know that Darwin's cousin Galton coined the term eugenics and headed up the first eugenics societies. But Darwin's son, Leonard, replaced Galton as the chairman of the National Eugenics Society in 1911. And that was actually you talk about places like Cambridge, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, all of those had eugenics societies. Every major, the National Academy of Sciences, you name it, all had eugenic societies and eugenic connections. Eugenic scientists were leading all of these things. Darwin's other sons, Horace, Francis, and George, they helped lead eugenic societies as well. So this was Darwin's family heritage. This is all his sons were involved in this stuff.
Do you think it seems like his family's crazy, but yet he's trying to come for us? Have you thought about your own family? You might need to look at some things.
But I'm going to try to maintain some objectivity here. Do you think Darwin would have been disturbed by his ideas being applied in this way?
Yes, he was actually.
Okay.
He was disturbed by it. And that's the thing about Darwin is, like I said, he opposed slavery. And he was not a fan of these sort of positive he didn't believe that we should do these sort of, although they didn't have the term, at the time when he talked about it, but he knew people talked about these sort of things and helping evolution along. And if you read his papers and his stuff, he was not a fan of that idea. And he was afraid that his ideas would be used for these things. The problem is there's nothing inherent to his theory that would put a limit on doing these things. So in other words, he had to appeal to his own moral standards. Said, well, I don't approve of those things, but there's nothing in this idea of survival of the fittest. There's nothing in the idea of, the strong take over the weak. There's nothing within that. I mean, Darwin himself wrote, as I said earlier, that eventually he thought the Europeans, the civilized races, would eradicate the uncivilized, the black peoples. But he also said this, he gave an analogy, evolution has no moral standard or compass. So a bee, like the queen bee, after she mates, she can kill the little bee she mated with, right? He said there's nothing that prevents humans from saying that would be our moral standard. It just so happens we evolved differently. So there is no moral ground on which one could oppose eugenics, except to have a moral preference against it. And he knew that was going to be a problem, but he didn't really have a good solution for that.
And they were having these eugenics parties well into the mid 20th century?
Yeah. So
they call them societies. It's an academic word, not parties.
Yeah.
That's a mess. It was like a eugenics turn up.
Okay, so here's the thing. Darwin, in his writings, his analogy for evolution was this idea of breeding. If we take a herd of cattle and we want to breed the best and not breed the others, this was his analogy for why evolution worked. So people naturally took this idea that, hey, well, what's good for society? Well, it's not the individual rights, it's not the individual needs, it's what's good for the common good. Like a herd, because we are animals, we need to treat society like a herd of, cows, or if we're a bunch, for dog breeders, or if we're whatever we're trying to do, we're trying to get the strongest and the best to survive. So they used to have these, you'd have like a 4-H, right? You go to the county fair and they got the Holsteins and stuff. And there's quotes, people's like, hey, look, you go over a couple barns and there's the Holsteins and they're giving prizes for the best cow. We do the same here with the Joneses and the Smiths. We pick out the fittest and the finest, families, and we give them awards. And we show that this is what it is to be a true society, pursuing racial hygiene, racial purity, racial excellence.
Now, how do you think, or do you even think that this frame of thought
I was disturbed by it.
What?
And that's the thing about a true society.
Sorry.
Say that again?
I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry. No, my question was, do you think that this frame of thought has had any impact on things like institutional racism?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think, my opinion, this is the way I write it. I think Darwin's theory was the most virulent way, and I use that word intentionally, it was the most powerful tool for institutionalizing the racism that already existed. And so I do think that the phrase institutionalized racism makes sense, but I think it makes sense within how we see it played out in history. So I talked about a few examples. Let me give you a new one. So actually, anybody can pick up a book. There's a guy named James Whitman. He's a professor at Yale Law. And he talks about America's model, Hitler's American model, how Hitler built his laws on the laws that the eugenists were having passed here in the United States. And so he traces, now he doesn't tie it to Darwin, and it makes sense why, because he's probably, from that worldview, doesn't see that that's the philosophy behind why these laws came into place. But I'll give you, Jim Crow laws, redlining laws, but FDR's New Deal, Roosevelt's New Deal. Do you know that the strongest supporters of the New Deal, that is there's a bunch of poor people. We want to give government money is going to help the poor, right? Oh, it's for their good, right? But the strongest supporters were the Southern segregationists. Now think about why. Black people were no longer on plantations. They couldn't control where people lived by law because these laws were falling out of favor. They couldn't do stuff. But if I tell you, hey, I'm going to give you money because you're poor, but hey, you've got to live in this part of the community. You've got to live over here where I'm giving you wonderful housing, all because I care. So the segregationists realized that, hey, the best way to make sure that we're not having interracial marriage and corrupting the human species is to just be altruistic, to help them, to give them what they need. That's really how it came about. That's how those things were used by these folks.
So I want to bring it back to where we started there, and with your sign right behind you of the Imago Dei, of the image of God, because I am always beating this drum that worldviews matter. How we define terms matters, and that where we get our ideas of good, what's good, true, and beautiful matters. that our worldview is informed by Scripture, and in this idea of eugenics and kind of how it just played out, ethics from Darwin's scientific idea. I think it just is such a great example of why worldviews matter, and it can lead you to some dark places. And so many parallels that come popping to my mind now of just making connections of what's happening in the conversation we're having right now about critical race theory, because we're drawing from some other framework for what's good, true, and beautiful, and assigning meaning to people based on skin color, but in a little different way. My mind is just kind of going in a lot of different ways. I'm just wondering, do you think that there's people that still promote some version of eugenics today, or have we largely grown past that as a society?
No, I think it's alive and well. I mean, there's a speech that one of the presidential candidates, Bernie Sanders, I believe, was giving, and I actually tried to look that up thinking about this show, but I couldn't find it, recall all the details of it. But essentially, he talked about how we need to make sure that we're the people in society are the healthiest, and that we're going to use things like, again, it's things like euthanasia are a eugenic practice. Birth control, yes, it's eugenic in its purpose. It doesn't mean everyone who uses birth control is a eugenist, but a lot of people's motivation for wanting people to use it is because they believe that certain people should not reproduce. And you see that in climate activism today a little bit, I think. The idea that, some people, there's too many human beings. We've got to control that. We've got to limit how many people reproduce. And so we do that through, positive ways, such as like, well, the government's going to give you, certain benefits if you limit your childbearing, or if you have too many, the government will cut back benefits. I mean, there's people advocating all kinds of things.
Would an example be in Iceland, for example? I've heard that they've nearly obliterated Down syndrome population.
Yes.
By pre-screening
amniocentesis
and abortions, or the one-child policy in China. Would you see those as being kind of modern examples?
Yeah, those are modern. I'll give you, those are good examples too. CRISPR, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the gene editing technology that's out there. Now, actually, the transhumanist movement, the entire transhumanist movement, I don't know if you ever studied that, but that's really fascinating study as well. They're way more upfront about their biases this way. Now, they wouldn't call themselves eugenists because, again, historically, a lot of that was built around, skin colors and those sorts of things. But it doesn't matter if you say, well, okay, we all are equal. There's no difference between our skin color. This is why CRT took example, by the way, why race became a social construct, because they couldn't have it tied to biology anymore because of the eugenics movement. So they had to say it has nothing to do with biology. So everything became this social construct. But now we've moved it into, again, in the name of science, well, we can edit, we can keep these diseases from coming, we can keep these. And it all sounds good until you realize who's deciding what is a disease, who's deciding what qualifies as inferior, and what is the next step beyond evolution for the next phase of humanity, and how do we get there, which many people are talking about. And so who is it that we have to make sure doesn't reproduce certain characteristics, and who's going to define what they are? And we're in a big period of flux, but it is around and the conversation is happening.
This is such a tricky issue, and there's so many ethical questions that are wrapped up in this. That's for sure. I'm thinking about, just even in my own life, I was pregnant twice, and both times my husband and I said no to certain genetic tests or screenings for our kids because we knew that no matter what happened, we were going to go forward with that. And
Yeah.
and so now looking back on that, I'm thinking, that could be considered sort of a type of setup of creating, genetic purity, if you will.
Yeah.
And it's just, but it's a widespread practice. It's what you do when you're pregnant, and so it's interesting.
It's where we have to be careful. This is why the Christian worldview, as you brought up, and this is why the whole focus of my PhD is on this. What is the best argument, the most coherent argument we can make that accounts for these things, that give us a way of looking at these issues? And again, I'm focused on race and racial reconciliation, but it's all applicable to these other things, because no matter whether you pick skin color or if you want to pick, a mental capacity as the standard, there have to be foundational ideas that say what makes humans, what makes us persons, what makes us sacred. And anything I do can't violate that sacred nature that God has created us. And so, just to give a real quick example, because I know I don't want to go too far on this, but you talk about Sanger. They finally acknowledged, hey, they're going to take her name off stuff in New York, the building up there at Planned Parenthood.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because that's a huge admission. In fact, we've got the press release from the Planned Parenthood in New York. They just announced that this week, that they were going to finally take her name off the name
big
of the,
whoop. They took her name off. They still didn't stop the practice.
Yeah.
You're not suggesting that they actually stop abortions, are you?
Well, I mean, here's the thing.
We're not just going to virtue
cancel
signal?
culture is that we want to get rid of all this stuff. And so I'm like, if she was a racist and, out to do away with people of color to purify the race, then I say do away with the practice.
Yeah, it's
still disproportionately impacting women of color.
Well, especially in New York City, there's more Black children that are aborted
than are born. Yes.
That's deeply troubling. Talk about systemic racism.
It is. And there needs to, I don't know. I can't. I'm like, y'all took her name off the building. That's awesome. Yeah, great. But your practice is still impacting millions of Black lives.
But let's talk
year.
about Sanger, because this might be new for some people, that she actually, Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, at times seemed to make some statements that she was sympathetic to eugenics ideas. Yeah.
Yeah. So she was more than sympathetic. She had people who were eugenists on her board. She allied herself with eugenics. Now, again, she was more for positive eugenics, not negative eugenics. She believed that people should have sort of choices to make, and she didn't want the government necessarily imposing those, which is where the people that have defended her have said, like, oh, well, she wasn't a eugenist because she was opposed to forced sterilizations. Yes, but that's not what defined eugenics. That's where they're playing on some things. So, but she was, here's the thing. Her worldview was very much, you could put her, I think she bought into the Marxist philosophy. Now, more work might need to be done on this, but I pulled this quote for you guys because I knew there's a crossover to this and this topic with CRT and stuff you guys have been talking about. In her book, Pivot of Civilization, Sanger wrote this: altruism, humanitarianism, and philanthropy have aided and abetted machinery in the destruction of responsibility and self-reliance among the least desirable elements of the proletariat. So what she's saying is that Christian moral virtues have been the most destructive thing in keeping people alive who otherwise would have died off. We're giving aid to these poor people when what we should be doing is giving them birth control so they stop having babies and being a drain on the society. Now you start to hear the Planned Parenthood terminology come here. Oh, well, these people, I'm just getting abortion because I don't want to have a kid will be a hindrance to society. People have been led to believe that that's for their benefit, but what they're doing is it's a shared practice of eugenics. Right? They just agree to the eugenic practice, but it doesn't make it any less reprehensible if you believe in Imago Dei, if you believe in this idea that we're all made in the image of God, the B'Tselem Elohim.
So
Now,
it's kind of the choice element of, well, I'm choosing, I don't want the child to be born into poverty. And
Yes.
so I'm choosing the abortion. This is all connected to this type of, what do you call it, negative eugenics?
Yeah, the positive versus negative. Yeah.
Yeah.
But here's an analogy.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, is it even real choice at this point, or is it more brainwashing? Like, you've been set up to believe this rhetoric for years upon years upon years, and now it's just a subconscious running in your mind and in culture. I don't know that it is really a choice. I just feel like it's what the setup is.
This is where CRT is right in making an observation about how powerful narratives are in being able to blind people to the truth of what's happening. They're right about that, but they're wrong about many things that they're pointing out that fit that narrative. And this is a great example, and exactly what you point out is that, just because, so if I convince a young person that, I'm bullying some girl. Let's use the terminology today. So there's a group of girls and they bully a young girl. They, you're fat, you're ugly, you don't deserve to live. And they convince her she needs to take her life and kill herself. Does that make their bullying any less evil or wicked because they didn't pull the trigger? So they didn't take her out to the woods and shoot her themselves, but they convinced her by, this has happened, with young girls, especially being convinced that they're so not, their life is so unworthy that they take their own life. We would say that's wrong, even though she took her own life. But we're doing the same thing with the unborn. We're saying that life doesn't have a chance. That life isn't going to be worthy of life. That's actually a phrase Hitler used, life unworthy of life. And we've convinced them and brainwashed people, like you said, into thinking and buying into that narrative that it's compassion to end life for some reason. So this is very disconcerting on how we use this. Let me give you one real quick quote because I think it helps. In 1921, so Sanger wrote a birth control review, which is this magazine. She said the campaign for birth control is not merely of eugenic value. So she acknowledged this birth control, which is her bread and butter, that has a eugenic value, but is practically identical in bed with the final aims of eugenics. So it's not only just shares the eugenic values, but the end goal, the goal is the same. That's why she even wrote that the Japanese problem on the West Coast, too many Japanese people, birth control is a great solution, she said. It'll get rid of the feeble-minded, all these immigrants, but it'll get rid of the Japanese that we don't want so much.
So it was her issue, because there's a very famous quote with Sanger that she's wants to find, Black preachers and a Black doctor to help bring her message and convince Black people to engage in abortions or in, population selection, if you will. I think that, I guess I'm wondering, in your research, have you seen anything like, was she genuinely racist against Black people, or was it more about them being poor and she was just kind of against all poor people?
So this is where some
they're not. One isn't, but I do think her strategy is interesting. She's like, I got to get some preachers because Black people are very religious. They tend to be Christians, and I got to get some doctors that sound scientific.
Let me answer that through an analogy to a Christian person, and I'll get to that answer. And I see why I understand why progressives and those who defended Sanger do that, and they may have a technically correct point to some degree. I'm not sure that they do, but I'm saying, okay, maybe if we squint hard enough, they're right. But here's an analogy. So you had Christians who were segregationists, who believed that whites shouldn't marry, opposed interracial marriages. The university, Bob Jones University, right?
Right.
Up until the they opposed, they didn't allow Blacks to come onto campus, and they opposed it. Now, if you read his writings, what he talked about is he looked at the book of Acts and he said, look, God has ordained, he said, nations for their own boundaries. So he said that, look, blacks are not inferior to whites. Asians are not inferior. They just shouldn't interbreed because God has ordained them for their own boundaries.
Right.
And so we're violating nature. We're violating God's design when we have interracial relations and have interracial babies because it wasn't God's design that they should interbreed. So his argument went essentially this. So in heaven, yeah, you're going to have all kinds of people, blacks and Asians and, Inuits and Eskimos and whoever, they'll all be there. They're all equal, but we just shouldn't be together in this life because that was his thing. So now no Christian, hopefully today, would say that he's racist, right?
Right.
That's a racist thing. Now, it doesn't matter how his motives were different. And he said, well, we're still equal and all this other kind of stuff. He was still a racist. I would say the same holds true for Sanger in this case, is that, yes, it's true. When she looked at race, she looked at this idea that there was one race, the human race, which now today, by the way, is racist to say that. But so then she was a racist. But anyway, according to CRT. But there was one human race. So she wasn't racist against blacks like, oh, whites are better than blacks. She was equally discriminatory against many races of many kinds of people, all the mentally ill, the poor people who are thieves or made their living breaking the law. She was opposed to all of those people reproducing. So she would align herself with the KKK because it was convenient to her ends. So I would say that in my estimation, she was a racist, but she was more than a racist. She was an anti-humanist, which I think is actually maybe charged because she denied the sacredness of humanity. So even if you grant that she wasn't a racist, and even if I would, for the sake of argument, say, okay, she's not a racist, who cares? She was anti-human in the sense that we would know and value the image of God in all people.
Wow, this has been fascinating.
It's been super informative and helpful in understanding eugenics and understanding, how it's played out in American history and in world history, and how far it went into the 20th century. You kind of think about these things like ending off, like at 1899, but no, like you can have your eugenics turn up, in 1954. That's ridiculous.
I mean, even now, if you look at the practices in Iceland and China and other
still
places,
happening. With some what is the word I'm like with some just regularity.
Yeah. Well, we're getting so many comments. Some of them I'm not sure you're going to know the answers to, Joe, but let me just run a couple of them here. Our friend Jeremy wants to know, where was that Jeremy question? All right. I'd like to know what he thinks of the recent comments of black athletes and celebrities about African superiority. I'm wondering if Jeremy means like that Nick Cannon situation.
Oh, that was a mess.
Is this in the same spirit of eugenics? Is it like a weird version of that?
It is. It actually really is. I think it embraces some sort of neo-Darwinian worldview of evolutionary. Some are better, some are less, some are more fit, some are less fit, kind of thing. I think it has a worldview that denies the sacredness of all human beings. So philosophically, I think it fits in. We just did a show on this last Wednesday. A friend of mine who is named Ryan, who's a church planter in an urban context, he gets this question every day as a black pastor in a predominantly black church. And we did a show called "Is Christianity the White Man's Religion?" But we talked about the Nick Cannon quote, and it has definitely shades of eugenics in it to me, because he talks about the blacks were gods. And how did the whites, who were closer to the animals, is how he described it, overcome the gods? So he's using Farrakhan's language. He's using it's really a hodgepodge of philosophies, but he is borrowing. I mean, he's definitely not whole into anything. I don't know how well he's borrowed from 20 different sources to kind of have his own thinking, but definitely eugenic ideals and Darwinian ideals have been brought into that system to make those arguments.
Well, I'm even hearing, I was talking to an acquaintance of mine who is in the psychology realm, and she's saying it's very common now on psychology message boards that psychologists are saying, yeah, well, white people are just genetically predisposed to racism. And that narrative is building momentum in the mental health community.
Well, and not only that, like some of the psychological Facebook groups that I'm a part of are like actively teaching CRT because they want like white psychologists to be able to understand their racism, to understand their white privilege, to understand their whiteness. And so oh gosh, what is it called? I actually know someone who teaches a class on like CRT and mental health, how to decolonize your therapy room, so to speak. Yeah. So that's definitely a thing. It's been here for a while.
Huge crossover. Huge crossover. Yeah. You're right.
Well, thank you, Joe. I want to encourage everyone to get connected with your podcast, morethancake.org, and people can get caught up with you. Also, your other podcast, Off the Cuff, with our friend Jane Pantig. And we just bless all your work that you're doing there in San Diego with Ratio Christie.
Thank you so much for coming on.
The students, thank you so much.
Ladies. It's been an honor to be a part of your show. You guys are doing such a great job. Keep it up.
You brought some great information for us, and we're very grateful for that. It's been an extremely fascinating conversation. I learned a lot.
It was good.
Yeah.
Anytime you're bored and can't get one of those high quality guests, you have me back.
Stop it.
We'll keep you on the list.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Joe.
Take care of that.
All right.
Bye.
Bye. Wow.
Yeah.
I kind of vaguely knew what eugenics was, but that was way.
That's good stuff.
That was crazy. That was some crazy stuff. Okay. All right, we got a couple more things to talk about here as you're looking through the comments. I want to let everybody know, if you missed our up conference last week, the Uniting People conference is the first annual conference of what we're hoping for to do in each year. The recordings are now available. So all you have to do is to go to centerforbiblicalunity.com/up2020, and you can get you can buy or rent the recordings. We're going to release them on Tuesday. You can download the notes from my talk and from Monique's talk. You can pre-order. You can find the link to pre-order Dr. Thaddeus Williams' book, which was the source of his talk. Now, here's a little trivia for you. Guess whose arms those are on Thaddeus's book?
Whose?
I am sitting at the table here with the arm model.
That would be me. That would be me. These arms, yes. Yes, yes.
Those are Monique's arms.
Yes.
On Thaddeus's book cover.
Feeling fancy. Feeling fancy.
You can wow all your friends and neighbors with that little piece of trivia.
I know those arms. I know those arms.
Okay, so you can go to, again, that's centerforbiblicalunity.com/up.
2020. And I also want to thank Women in Apologetics for all of their help. They were amazing and incredible in everything that they put into making sure that our conference was a success. And so thank you very much. And then also to Impact 360. Impact 360 is a discipleship ministry out in Atlanta, Georgia, just outside of Atlanta. And they have different programs, discipleship programs for teens and young adults. They have a week-long program for teens, a 2-week program for teens, and then they have a 9-month fellows program that serves almost like a gap year.
Yep.
And students go on a missions trip down in South America, I believe it's Brazil, and then also to Utah and do some mission work there. Then they have a 2-year master's program. Impact 360 sponsored our conference, and all of the attendees received one of their courses for free. And so just thank you very much to the team at Impact 360. It was a really, really awesome turnout and an awesome gift for all of the attendees.
People love that you're the arm model.
Oh, really? Y'all go ahead and talk about them arms. Go ahead. I ain't mad at you. Yes. Yeah, I knew her win. Stop it. Yes. See, but I had to do it right. You got to be like, hey, you got to be fly with it. You can't just have your arms like this. Oh, I used to take dance with one of my dance teachers. If you would hold your arms like this, she'd call you chicken arms, and she would yell at you from across the room, be like, no chicken arms, no chicken arms. And I'd be like, okay, sorry. Yeah. So I had to make sure I wasn't doing my chicken arms.
That's right. Okay, so people are getting ready for back to school. I know many of you.
Who going back to school?
Well, that's just the thing. Nobody knows if anyone's going back to school.
You mean back to the kitchen table?
I know.
I'm planning for back to the kitchen table. What do you mean?
People just aren't completely sure what's happening.
Nobody knows. Nobody knows. Every day it's like something different. Like, hey, we're going to go back. Just playing.
Just kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, right now might be a good time to consider homeschooling or reconsider homeschooling. I'm going to give the little pitch because I think that a lot of people are so scared about homeschooling. It's not as scary as you think. It's doable for many more people. Now, I know that some people that have special ed issues and, getting support for those people, those are the people I really feel like the saddest for that are going through so much right now are people with kids that have special needs. Mm-hmm. And, it's so much of a struggle. But, I mean, it's a struggle for all of us. But my heart really especially goes out to people in that situation. So I sat down last night with my friend Brett Kunkel from Maven. And we talked about his webinar series that's coming up next week that he's doing with his wife. They're veteran homeschoolers. And we did a little short interview I'm going to play right now. And talked about homeschooling. It's a really great way for you to explore whether homeschooling might be for you. So let's roll that tape. Well, I'm here with my friend Brett Kunkel from Maven, and I'm excited to talk to him about an upcoming webinar that he's doing next week about homeschooling. Now, Brett, maybe you could talk to us about what prompted you to do this webinar series.
Well, my wife and I have been talking to a lot of parents who are looking at the fall and are now hearing of public and private schools that will not reopen for the fall, like in-person classes. And so they're looking at another at least 2, 3, 4 months, who knows, a whole semester, maybe even a whole year of doing classes online and trying to manage all that. And so we've got a lot of parents who are saying, who the kind of this current situation is causing them to rethink what they're going to do for their education of their kids. And a lot of people are now asking, hey, maybe I should homeschool. But a lot of people are also not quite sure where to start with that. And I think there's also a misconception that homeschool means doing school in home. And so my wife and I have been homeschooling our kids for about 12 years now, and have learned a lot through the process, have come to really love homeschooling them. And so we just thought, hey, this is a great time to help equip parents who are maybe considering this for the first time, who are even new to homeschooling, or even the veteran who wants a refresher, who wants to be encouraged, who wants additional tools. And so that really motivated us to put together this webinar.
Well, I know that for me, homeschooling was an awesome season of my life, and I'm always a big advocate to get more people into that conversation because there's just so many more resources that are available now than even were when I was homeschooling 15 years ago. So maybe you can talk to us a little bit about the seminars that you're going to be offering. We're going to show the website here if people want to get connected and find out what you guys are up to.
Yeah, so we're going to do 4 days, and there's going to be 4 main sessions. The first day, we're going to look at the idea of beginning with the end in mind. Okay, so when we talk about our kids and we talk about education, what's the goal? And often when we live in a culture, every one of us lives in a culture, and the culture simply presents to us what is the norm. And often we just adopt those views. And I think maybe unwittingly, unconsciously, often we have adopted secular views of education and what our goals are for our kids when it comes to education. So we want to kind of step back and say, hey, what is education? What is a Christian view of education? And what would be the goals then that I would have for my kid as a follower of Jesus? that would inform how I do, what I want for them when it comes to education. So that's going to be the first day. The second day is then looking at the parent as teacher. What are my roles and responsibilities? Because I think a lot of people have this misnomer about what a parent needs to do or needs to be equipped with in order to teach their kids. We often think, well, that means I have to know every subject inside and out to be able to teach my kids. And that's absolutely not the case. In fact, one of the greatest things about homeschooling is that you become a co-learner with your kids. You get to walk alongside them. You will grow yourself more than maybe you grew intellectually and in your knowledge base in your own schooling. And it's actually a real joy to get to walk along our kids and learn with them in this process. And so we're going to look at the different roles and responsibilities that we have. The third day, we're going to look at the myths surrounding homeschooling. And of course, we're going to address the big myth of socialization. And
that's always a big one. Yes.
Now that's the number one response or objection that I get when we talk about homeschooling, and we're gonna really unpack that and I think answer that kind of decisively, and actually see that homeschooling might socialize your kids better than any other system that's out there. And then the fourth day, we're going to talk about what a typical day looks like. What are some of the very practical things that we do in a homeschool day, especially now, given the framework that we're going to lay out in the first day about Christian education, a Christian worldview, perspective on education. So those are the four kind of topics of each one of the days. And I think it's going to be just a very good, comprehensive 101 for everyone.
So this is sort of an invitation for people that are new to homeschooling, or they're just thinking about it, trying the idea on, want to find out, is this for me? This is an opportunity for them to really explore that a little deeper.
Yeah, it's definitely for those who have maybe haven't even done homeschooling, but they're just considering it. But I also think this could be a huge benefit for those who have maybe just been doing it for a year or two. It could also be a benefit for those who have been doing it for a long while. Even if you consider yourself a veteran, oftentimes I think most of us, including my wife Erin and I, we kind of stumbled into it and really at the beginning, at the outset, didn't give it, I think, the clear thinking and careful attention to really developing a philosophy of home education, and really a philosophy of education from a Christian perspective, and how that really changes the game for us. And so I think even the veteran homeschooler will benefit from just really starting to lay out a careful articulation of the Christian worldview of education, what it means, that it's more than just merely academic achievement. So, but yes, definitely those who have never homeschooled before or just getting started, I think this is going to be a very helpful webinar for them.
Well, I want to encourage everyone to think about it, because now is a great time to just really be proactive and take control of your kids' education and lead the way, because there's a lot of people looking for alternatives. And trust me, there are so many different ways to homeschool your kids. Trust me, whatever you think homeschooling is, it's probably not that. It's probably something else or different options that you don't even know about yet. So go sign up for the Maven seminar, Homeschooling 101, happening next week. Brett, give us the cost and the breakdown and all that.
Yeah, so it's going to start Monday, July the 27th. It runs every evening until Thursday. We're going to start at 6:00 p.m. Pacific time. And, so that's 7, 8, 9 across the U.S. The cost for the webinar is $49, and that will get you access to each one of the sessions. The sessions will be about 45 minutes, and then we're going to do an additional 45 minutes of live Q&A. So through the Zoom platform, people are going to be able to ask their questions, get clarification, really, ask those questions that they really feel like they need to have answered before they maybe decide to take this step. We're providing a PDF workbook that will have some outlines, that will have additional resources, that will point you in the right direction, that will give things like sample schedules from various homeschool veteran moms who have been doing this for a while, and really trying to resource you. And I think, I think parents really need to step back from the education of their kids and ask the question, hey, if I've got my kid for about 18 years in my home, what's that end goal? What kind of kid, what kind of person do I want to cultivate and send out of my house? What are those longer term goals? I mean, is it merely academic achievement and going off to a good college, or is it something so much deeper and richer and more satisfying in terms of who they are becoming? And academic achievement is a part of that, but it's definitely not the whole story. And so I think it's going to be a great time for parents to really step back and reflect on what it is they want to cultivate in their kids' lives, and what kind of ambassador for Jesus do they want to send out into the world.
Fantastic. And I want to encourage everyone, go check out Brett's ministry. It's Maven is the name of the ministry. MavenTruth.com is the website. You can sign up for the Homeschooling 101 webinar. But if you're a parent, a child influencer, youth pastor, children's pastor, teacher, you're going to want to follow Brett and his ministry, Maven, and get connected to what they are up to. Thanks so much for talking to me, Brett. It was great to hang out with you for a few minutes.
Good to see you again, Krista. Thanks for having me.
All right, my friends. That was the no makeup edition. It was late.
I wasn't even there, okay? Let's just be clear.
It was late.
Like, no.
Yeah, it was the end of the day. But we do have a coupon. So if you want to go to the Maven conference, the webinar on Homeschooling 101, Brett, I worked it out with Brett. We have a special thing just for our viewers. You just go on checkout, enter promo code all the things.
All the things, all one word. Don't separate it out. All the things. And it's maventruth.co/homeschool101. When you check out, use the coupon code all the things.
You get 20% off.
Yes, we love a coupon. Don't play no games. Yes.
And we're glad we could help Brett out and just helping to get the word out about this great opportunity. I had been asking the Lord this week, actually, to do something on homeschooling on the show. And I just wasn't really sure what that could be. When I saw Brett's post, I was like, yes, maybe we can get him on the show. So I'm glad it worked out.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
All right, you ready for the tweet of the week?
I guess.
Let's do it.
All right, my friends, this is actually, it's not a tweet.
Kind of makes you want to remember that old school dance? What was that? The snake, when you just kind of hey, you just got to go on, take it back. Yeah. Remember the bounce? We're like, oh, I'm dating myself, y'all. When you do the bounce, you know you old, okay? I'm not playing. He's calling it the bang head bounce. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So the tweet of the week is actually
bring it back. Oh.
It's actually not a tweet. It's a Facebook post.
I'm still on the dance.
I know.
That's okay.
Are you ready to move on?
I guess so.
Okay. We're going to have the post of the week. Tim Stratton, our friend. Now, you were on Tim's podcast earlier in the week.
I was on Tim's podcast sometime this week. I don't remember exactly what day it was.
It was Thursday. It was so busy. And
yes.
so he tried to pay to promote or what's called boosting on Facebook. Boost your interview so it could propagate to more people. Unfortunately,
it was rejected.
It was the Facebook
was like, we don't even want your money. We would rather support Black Lives Matter than take your money. You can keep your money.
But I thought Facebook keeps inviting me to lift Black voices.
Not this Black voice. It's some Black voices. They need to modify that.
Lift some Black voices.
Yes. And then there was something else I feel like where we were censored. But I think part of, and we talked about this earlier, part of our algorithms and things like that, it's like they're on to us. This is why it's so important that you share the show, that you, like hashtag all the things, just get it out there so that Facebook knows that people are watching. I don't know if it's a double-edged sword. Like,
Yeah.
you know, people are watching, and so we kind of shrink them back. But it's still a good
But
thing
when-
that people are watching.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I feel like the more popular and the more our message gets out there, the more our algorithm tends to shrink. And so
They've definitely pegged us, because in the
Yeah.
beginning they were propagating our post to thousands of people, like during the riots and everything. But I think now that they know that we're Christians,
and like your post gets to 4 people.
Yeah.
You get to 4 people. And one of them, it's like somewhere on another side of the planet.
interacting with the posts, keep, liking, commenting, doing things, because Facebook is definitely now in the mode of shadow banning us. It's big fun. So when Tim posted that picture today on Facebook, I was like, oh yeah, this makes sense. This fits with what I'm seeing in our algorithms.
Yeah.
I don't know if they have your name pegged now.
It's like, hey, that black voice right there. But you know what?
We need to shut her up.
Right? Uncle Virgil in the chat on Facebook, in the comments, said he was still doing the bang head bounce. Oh, gotta bring it on back. When that beat come on real good, I'm looking at myself in the monitor and I'm like, oh wait, I'm not on beat. But then it's a little second delayed, so that's why. I was like, wait, what? Wait, hold on.
So
Yes,
help us
Y'all
lift.
do the Roger Rabbit.
I don't know what that
the
is.
Kid and Play. Do the
I don't know
electric
what that
slide. Ooh, these are the dances. I was like knee high to a grasshopper trying to hang out with the big kids.
Maybe we need a dance of the week. Watching you
You do the Roger Rabbit. Oh, yeah.
So help lift Monique's black voice.
Yes. Well, I mean, okay, let's be real. Like, it's not even about the black voice. When you look at the riots, when you look at these Black Lives Matter protests and all this stuff, these ain't black people out there. It's like 80% white people. It's a liberal left kind of voice that is Antifa or Marxist or, whatever you want to call it. But I don't know that anybody's really concerned right now about, truly lifting the black voice. That's just some of my thoughts on it. I could be wrong, but I do know that they are not interested in lifting every black voice.
Yeah.
Although, do you know that's the black national anthem?
What?
It starts out with lift every voice and sing. Uncle Virgil, I know you know this song. Lift every voice and sing, but they're not trying to lift every voice. They not.
Not every voice.
Not every voice.
All right, my friends, that's a wrap on this week's show. We hope you enjoyed the content. Be sure to hit that share button, smash that thumbs up, give us the like,
Share.
comment, and
Yes.
all of that. And just help continue to spread the word, because the shadow banning is real. So one of my things in theology is that all things must come under Christ's feet, and that includes social media. And we're just always trying to use social media to the glory of God, YouTube to the glory of God, harnessing that technology and bringing all things under the feet of Christ. So, all right, do you have any last words, jokes, dances?
None.
You're
I'm
good?
all out. We have gone over
All right.
in our time. It is time for us to go. Bye, everybody.
Have a good week.
There's nothing left.